President Trump is mad at Vladimir Putin. President Trump is mad at Zelensky. Wow, why is Trump mad at nearly everybody right now? Trying to figure this whole war out, that we have all kinds of issues going on with trying to get this piece of a ceasefire, this piece of a ceasefire, still looking at how the war is going to come to an end. What about this rare earth minerals deal? All these things are up in the air. Nothing is settled, and Trump seems to be losing patience across the board. First of all, let's start off looking at the first half of this, is that why is Trump mad at Putin?
In his call with Kristen Welker, he said, quote, "You could say I was angry, pissed off when Putin said that, when Putin started getting into Zelensky's credibility, because that's not going in the right location." Trump also said that if he was unable to strike a deal with Russia on the war in Ukraine, he would impose tariffs on Russian oil. Trump later adding, "If Russia and I are unable to make a deal on stopping the bloodshed in Ukraine, and if I think it was Russia's fault, which it might not be, but if I think it was Russia's fault, I am going to put secondary tariffs on oil, on all oil coming out of Russia."
It's not entirely clear what sparked Trump's anger on this situation, why he got upset. But the bottom line is he believes that Russia is not doing what he thinks that they should. And this really kind of illustrates, I think, just kind of a lack of understanding in the administration about where we stand on leverage. Now, Trump has several times said that Putin has the cards, that Ukraine doesn't have the cards, and he's trying to make a deal. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. It looked earlier like that he was tracking on where all this stuff is going to go. But now all of a sudden he's making these statements like this one. And the question is, what has got him upset? Now, one of our viewers here is saying, "I'm sorry, Mr. Davis, but the blame is now on Trump. After a week of Europe and Zelensky sabotaging peace, he blames Putin. I checked Telegram. When did Russia target energy facilities? Peace is dead." Now, you may have seen a show that I did on Saturday, I think it was, to where I said the same basic thing, that it appears that from the Russian perspective, the peace ideas are dead, that diplomacy has run its course, and that now that evidence is starting to emerge, that they're on a military path to just take whatever they need in order to accommodate their security interest on their western flank as they see it. We'll see if that works out. Information continues to come out, which makes that an entire possibility. Until it happens, nothing is set in stone. Diplomacy could be reemerged. Things could change. But the problem is with what he's referring to in there is this issue of who's violating the ceasefire. That's one of the real problems with this, is that no one's very clear. Has a ceasefire actually been agreed to by any parties, and what are the conditions of it? So far, we have only vague statements of people, independent statements. You don't have this unified thing until the day that you see the U.S., Ukraine, and Russia publish a unified document that all three sign that says these are the terms of the ceasefire. This is what is permissible. This is what is not. Here is the duration. Then you don't really have a ceasefire. So what you have left is that these accusations, counter accusations, et cetera, which just keeps the pot stirred up and seems to be moving back further. We don't know if behind the scenes Putin had said something to Trump, or that Trump had said, "Hey, I need you to do this," and Putin is going, "Maybe I will. I don't know. I'm not clear on that. Let me hang on. Whatever." That he's not doing, that Putin is not doing what Trump expected. So now he's, quote, pissed off because Russia's not following the script that Trump has written. Here's part of the problem. What this illustrates is that the administration still thinks it has cards to play. It does not think that it doesn't have cards to play. And as I've said, there are some, but they're small cards. And that means that you can move things around the margins. But we don't have any big cards. We don't have any face cards. So we don't have any of the higher cards that's going to give you leverage to compel Russia to do anything. And I think that that's still what we see, that we think that through the threats of sanctions, or in this case, oil tariffs, that Russia is going to say, "Oh, shoot. Okay, never mind. All right, fine. We won't go down that path." That's clearly what Trump thinks, that he can just compel Russia to do things, which ironically is the same thing that Zelensky has been saying here in the last 4 or 5 days, that he wants to put pressure on Putin to force him into a peace of benefit to the Ukraine side. You hear, of course, the European sides all over that saying the same kind of things. We're trying to get into a situation where we can compel to a just and lasting peace, as Keir Starmer says almost every day. But, his definition of a just and lasting peace and Russia's are somewhat different, shall we say. They're not even on the same planet. And so as long as you have the objectives that are literally on different planets, how can anybody come to a condition to where you're going to have a unified peace where everybody is signing off on it? The ceasefires were between those three parties. If you got an end of war negotiation settlement, you're going to have four parties, because you got to add Europe to that list here. Everybody has to agree on what the end terms of it. That's just how it's going to work. That's how it has to work. And so far, man, they're miles apart. I'd say that evidence is that the Russia and American side are probably closer, but obviously there's still some significant gaps between. But goodness, on the U.S., Ukraine, and Europe side, there's even more daylight, significantly more. And everybody's pulling in different directions. And of course, what does that do on the front line? It just means more Ukrainians are going to die today that didn't need to die. More Ukrainians are going to die tomorrow that don't need to die. More territory is going to be lost ultimately, because it's just a complete unwinning prospect. And there's no rational path for the U.S., Ukraine, or Russia, or European side to think that we just need to delay this out. We need to drag it out. We need a little bit more stuff. There's none of that. That's not even on the table here. And yet that does seem to be motivating some people. It also, this statement of anger also shows that the administration side is not really tracking the level of importance that Russia places on this. This is not just some kind of issue that they want a deal, that they want this deal instead of that deal. This is a core existential issue. This is an identity issue for Russians. They view that they have not been fighting Ukraine. They view that they have been fighting NATO. And if they don't get NATO and Ukraine, Europe and United States, if they don't get all of this into a situation where they feel like they can control their own security going forward, i.e. getting at the root causes, which you hear from the Russian side all the time, they're not going to agree to any kind of a deal. And obviously not obviously, if you don't know, there was a piece in the New York Times, which we'll get to subsequently in this session here, that's not an unreasonable position for the Russians to be in. It's also based on actual evidence, and now fact has been pushed in. The New York Times, of all places, has admitted a lot of the things we suspected and now have graphic evidence to exactly what was happening. But see, all of that goes into why the Russian side is so adamant on that they will accomplish all the objectives they set forth when they launched their operation in February 2022, and they will not stop until they have secured it, either by peaceful means or by military means. But we don't seem to understand that, and we think it's more like a deal, and we just got to give you enough issues here. But Russia won't stop until they get their security issues nailed down. And once we figure that out, then that makes it possible to actually find common ground, which right now still isn't. But it turns out that Putin is not the only one who's reached the ire of President Donald Trump. Also, the other half of this equation, Zelensky.
I think Zelensky, by the way, I see he's trying to back out of the rare earth deal. And if he does that, he's got some problems, big problems. We made a deal on rare earth, and now he's saying, well, I want to renegotiate the deal. He wants to be a member of NATO. Well, he was never going to be a member of NATO. He understands that. So if he's looking to renegotiate the deal, he's got big problems.
Okay, that's just not going to help matters here. That's not going to help the United States get to an end that we can live with, that accomplishes our national security interests, that has anything within a modicum of beneficial to the Ukraine side. Because, as I've said many times, Russia doesn't need a negotiated settlement. They have all the inputs they need. They have all the motivation they need. They have all the domestic support that Putin needs. And they have all the industrial capacity that they will need, all the inputs, everything else to continue this war indefinitely. They don't need a negotiated settlement here. They were in a vulnerable position in late 2022 And that was the one time you had a chance to actually have a negotiated settlement that had some benefits for the Ukraine and the Western European side. We threw that in the trash. It'll never come back. That day is gone. So now then Russia only has a position of strength from which to negotiate. Ukraine is not so. They have needs here. They can't continue fighting because at some point this attrition warfare will literally exhaust their country completely, economically, militarily, and certainly the manpower issue on the ground. At some point, it's just math. It's going to happen. So the question is, how fast can it happen? You see Trump is interested in making a deal now. He's in a hurry. So if you have one party that's in a hurry and you have another party that's like, I'm fine, we can keep going for a long time, who do you think that's going to give the leverage to? And then when you also go and you say, now I'm going to find fault with my guy, the guy that's on my side of this line, and that he's going to be in big trouble. See, by Trump saying out loud that Zelensky better play ball here, he better come to a deal or he's going to be in big trouble. What do you think that signals to the Russian side? That makes them even less likely to do anything, less likely to make any kind of compromises when they can just sit back and go, you guys have at it. Let me know how it works out. We'll be here in Moscow continuing our operations on the front line of contact. So that actually makes it less likely that Russia is going to make any kind of submission to anything that Trump wants to do, and more likely that he's going to be more stalwart in continuing to put pressure on his side of the line, because he sees that the U.S. side is fractious with Europe. The U.S. side is fractious even with Zelensky. And by the way, Zelensky, that part of the apparent reason for Trump saying that about Zelensky was because after all this stuff, you may recall that when the rare earth deal was actually talked about more than a month ago, Trump sent Vicent, one of his cabinet secretaries, to Ukraine, wanted to sign a deal. He had the deal ready, just sign here. Zelensky said, yeah, we're not going to sign that. So that was kind of strike one. Then, of course, they got all that ironed out. And then the infamous thing about 3 or 4 weeks ago in the White House, where Zelensky and Trump and Vance all had an argument, whatever, that was supposed to have been signing the document again. That got bypassed. And then after this, we come back and say, all right, well, here's a new deal. And now then, apparently when Zelensky got it, he says, hang on, this is not the same deal. This is not what I agreed to. So we're not going to sign this either. So now Trump's mad about him, and he wants to renegotiate it. He wants to have apparently, I want some kind of provision that for all these rare earths, we're going to get something more than just handing it over to you. I don't want loans. I mean, this is kind of a quid pro quo situation here, but I also want some provision to get into NATO or something. We don't know for sure what all was going on, but Zelensky is unhappy about it, and apparently he's made it clear, and he hasn't signed it. So the deal maker Trump isn't happy about that, again, on the same issue with the same guy. And so now he's saying that. But you see, you can't have a negotiation where you're mad at this partner and mad at that partner, and you think that you're going to get the one partner over here to do something you want while you're fighting with this one. It just doesn't work that way, and it's not going to work here. So if it were only the Ukraine, the Russian, and the U.S. side, it would be an intractable situation. But now we have to add in the European side, and they're continuing to go on their near, if not solo path, they're going on their own path here. This is quite divergent from Trump, which makes, again, our side writ large even more disastrous. Here's Keir Starmer, again, just a few days ago, talking about where he wants to go.
First, stepping up the military pressure. So the Defense Secretary will chair the next Ukraine Defense Contact Group on the 11th of April to marshal more military aid and keep Ukraine in the fight. Because peace comes through strength. That was one of the main messages reasserted today and emphasized today all around the table and the meeting. Second, it means increasing the economic pressure on Russia, accelerating new, tougher sanctions, bearing down on Russia's energy revenues, and working together to make this pressure count. We also discussed how we can support the implementation of a full or partial ceasefire when it is in place, and how we can build on efforts towards negotiations on a just and lasting peace.
Yeah, there's that phrase again, that just and lasting peace. in which Russia gets nothing they want and Ukraine gets everything it wants, and Europe is happy with the way things are working out and they end up in a position of strength. That's just not going to happen. And Zelensky obviously keeps going back and forth with Europe because he always gets standing ovations. He always gets pat on the back. He always gets all these positive comments. Everybody always says, yay, we want to do what you want to do because we don't like Russia. Or we hate Russia. But look, this is just never going to happen because you see that at the core of it, at the first of it, his first point is we need to keep fighting. So the issue about the partial ceasefire didn't even come in until the end of his points there. The first one was we've got to keep fighting. We have to keep providing ammunition. We have to keep providing weapons. We have to keep providing money, all this stuff without ever saying what the objective is, other than a peace through strength, which is a bumper sticker on the back of a car, but there's no substance to it. You're actually putting money and physical infrastructure towards a bumper sticker that doesn't even exist on the real world. No one even knows what it means. What are you giving all this ammunition for? How far do you think that they need to be able to push Russia, which they haven't done at all, except for in a couple of tactical issues, which every time they make some gains and they're taking it right back because they just don't have the power to hold anything. It's obvious. It's a futile situation and utterly meaningless. All the offensive the tactical offensive counterattacks that have been going on. It defies any kind of ration. And of course, it, like all this other stuff, it just keeps on feeding more and more Ukrainian men into graves towards no outcome. Nobody in Brussels seems to care. Nobody in London, Paris, all these other places in Europe, they just seem totally unconcerned about how many Ukrainian men they're facilitating climbing into graves permanently. That is just really disheartening to me, but it's just also a big red flag, if not a siren warning, that the leadership of the West right now seems so disconnected from reality. They don't understand, first of all, even what they want to accomplish, and that what they're kind of generally going in this direction won't work. And I'm going to show you here in just a second that this is a continuation of something that's been going on for years. And it is alarming to me, not kind of, but is definitely alarming. But I mentioned at the outset of this that the current administration doesn't seem to have a full grasp of just how important this is to the Russian side, and how when you're talking about trying to find a negotiated settlement, they're not just looking at what is the terms on the paper today. They're looking backwards here at what has happened over the period of time leading up to this. And that definitely informs whether they're willing to make a deal that they can't firmly guarantee the results from with their own power. Now, in this short clip I'm about to show you here, you have, first of all, Putin talking about stuff that happened. And I think just before this, he's talking about things that happened in the Minsk Accords, which, as you know, from the Russian perspective, France and Germany signed off on this deal that was supposed to have made all these concessions, that both sides were supposed to make concessions to end the civil war that had been going on in Ukraine back in 2015. But the Western side said, well, we didn't actually expect it to be implemented. That's why we never put pressure on the Ukraine government to actually implement those things, because we just wanted them to have time to build up their military, for potential use against the Russians, which is what happened. Now Russia said we're not going to do that. Then as we get into this part where the clip starts here, he's talking about what didn't happen in Istanbul in 2022.
Former Prime Minister Mr. Johnson convinced the Ukrainian leadership that they needed to continue armed struggle to the last Ukrainian, essentially, in order to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. Apparently, he forgot that there are units like yours, that there are assets like your submarine. He either forgot or simply does not fully understand what the Russian people are, what is in our people's hearts and souls when it comes to the security of the motherland. As for what is happening today, it is basically clear as well. Along the entire line of combat contact, our forces hold the strategic initiative. Not long ago, I said, we will press them, and there is reason to believe that we will defeat them.
And look, I mean, there could be nothing any clearer than this display right there. Putin is saying all these things have happened in the past. They weren't worth the paper that they were written on. We can't trust the West. It's, of course, from our perspective in the West, we always talk about, oh, we can't trust Putin. And look, as long as both sides are convinced they can't trust the other side, fellas, that means the only outcome left is fighting it out on the battlefield. We are, in words, pursuing peace, but in actions, we're laying the foundation for the physical defeat of Ukraine. And Putin right there said, we have along the entire line of contact, 2,000 kilometers, you go all the way from the Kursk area or the Sumy area now, where that most of that fighting's going on, all the way around down to the southern part in the Zaporizhia area. And you see that Russia has the advantage all across the contact. They have the strategic advantage, meaning they set the terms of the debate. Even in this couple of areas where the Ukraine side has local counterattacks going on, that still hasn't changed the strategic dynamic that Russia is in the position of power. I've shown you also a lot of media reports that say Russia has two large groupings of formations which could launch new offensives literally any week now in the north in the Sumy area and in the south in the Zaporizhia area. Maybe somewhere else too. Who really knows? But there are groupings out there, and the Ukraine side. This is not my opinion or the Russians. The Ukraine side says that they feel that there's going to be new offensive start very soon and could go for 6 to 9 months, assuming that the Ukraine side can survive that. So you have them admitting openly that the West is well aware that Russia is preparing to increase its pressure on this 2,000 kilometer front, and we keep talking about, hey, let's don't agree to anything unless we actually like it. Not realizing, not just doing the standard logic that, okay, I don't like the conditions as they exist right now, and I want conditions X, Y, and Z, a just and lasting peace from Kiev's benefit that I would like to have happen. Now, even if you don't like the outcome, you can still see the ground. You can still see the map. You can still see how it's moving to the west. You can still see these apparently large groupings of Russian forces. You can see the annual threat assessment that the United States came out with last week and admitted that Russia has the strategic advantage and they can continue fighting and win a war of attrition. We've said that openly. Everything that you can see says it makes no sense to do anything other than have a negotiated settlement on the best terms we can get today, because every day we delay means more loss of territory, more loss of personnel, all that kind of stuff. And yet that is exactly what we're doing. And you see Putin in that comment there. And that goes also with something he said, I think it was last Monday, what they call National Guard Day, National Guard Troops Day in Russia, where he directly tied all of their historical stuff from World War II and the Great Patriotic War to what these guys are doing right now, which feeds into this domestic nationalistic fervor within Russia, where the support for the Russian people of this war is at its height. I don't think it's been any higher than it is right now. And you can see a lot of anecdotal evidence of that. So they're saying, hey, we're just going to keep going with this until we have the same outcome today that our forefathers had in World War II, which is the complete victory. And listen, if you read a lot of the Russian telegram channels, whether this is Putin's idea or not is remains to be seen. But at least among many of the advocates on the Russian side, they're saying it needs to be Berlin 1945, Kiev 2025. Those need to be identical in how that's going on. They don't want to just go to the Dnieper River. They don't want to just go to the gates of Kiev. They want to take Kiev. Now, Putin is still willing to go negotiated settlement if he gets what he says is his minimum requirements. And of course, that's not just a territory, but it's also the denazification, i.e. new elections, and the demilitarization, a shell of what they have right now. Those have to be agreed to by the Western side. And those are really high asks, which so far I don't see that they're actually going to do them. But that's where we are right now. We'll either agree to these onerous and ugly deals now, or all evidence shows that Russia will simply keep going. Whether they have a big new push or they just keep on with this methodical push, I can't say. But I can say with a lot of confidence that whether it's that one or the other, the net result is going to be the same. It'll just change when it's going to happen. My personal view is that the Ukraine military is so weak that if there is a concerted Russian push, especially in 2 weak points, wherever they may identify the weakest points, and they put a lot of pressure on those, I think that the chances are very high that there'll be a buckling and the Russians can roll into the country. So I think that that's probably the biggest danger. we'll see if the most likely course is to just keep on going with what they've been doing until they eventually, in 6 to 9 months, just literally just wipe out the Ukrainian army, and then they just by default end up in Kiev. We'll see how that happens, but it is ignoring reality to the highest degree against our own interest to continue going this way. Now, one last thing I want to talk about here. There's a reason why Russia is so immovable, not just because of those diplomatic things here, but one of the things that Russia has been saying and accusing the West of for a long time is that, this is not even just a proxy war. This is not just you giving ammunition to our opponent, but you physically being engaged in. Of course, we've denied it all the way through. No, it's not true. We're just giving them ammunition and weapons, and the Ukraine guys are figuring this out. That is, at least until a couple of days ago, I think it was on Friday, when the New York Times published a detailed assessment called The Secret History of the War in Ukraine. This is the untold story of America's hidden role in the Ukrainian military operations against Russian invading armies. This is a very, very long and detailed article. Recommend everybody who wants the truth to go and take a look at it. But I'm going to highlight 3 things that I saw that I think are really, really meaningful and where we're trying to go right now. This starts off, says the New York Times investigation reveals that America has woven into the war far more intimately and broadly than previously understood. At critical moments, the partnership was the backbone of the Ukrainian military operations that, by U.S. accounts, have killed or wounded more than 700,000 Russian soldiers. A vast American intelligence collection effort both guided big-picture battle strategy and funneled precise targeting information down to Ukrainian soldiers in the field. One European intelligence chief recalled being taken aback to learn how deeply enmeshed his NATO counterparts had become in NATO operations. They are part of the kill chain now, he says. Let me just ask you, to stop for a second here and imagine that. Let's go back and say during the U.S. war in Afghanistan, that we were fighting the Taliban and we had all these war troops going on, whatever, and then all of a sudden we find out that the Russians had been given the Taliban missiles, drones. All of a sudden now they have artillery pieces, all kinds of ammunition and explosives for more powerful IEDs, and American troops were getting killed because of this. Are we going to say, well, our fight's with the Taliban. I don't like it what the Russians are doing, but what do you do, right? We would be going crazy. You may recall, I don't know if you do or not, but I paid a lot of attention to this stuff. There was shortly, maybe a year or so before the war came to an end, there was some reports that Russians had been paying bounties to the Taliban people to kill American soldiers. And that got everybody's hair on fire. And I remember thinking, first, that's kind of weird because we're fighting the Taliban. They try to kill us every day anyway. They don't need a bounty for that, but whatever. That was what they were claiming, and everybody was all upset about it. How dare the Russians pay bounty to these guys? But now then, what if they actually gave them all this ammunition stuff? Or let's make it a little more painful. What happens if, and we don't have time to go into it in this episode, but Trump also over the weekend said that if Iran doesn't do what he said and come to the agreement he wants within his purported time frame, which is about a month and a half from now, there will be bombings in Iran. We will attack Iran. Now, what happens if Trump decides to make good on that? And by the way, that's a violation of the U.S. Law of 1973 War Powers Act and the U.S. Constitution. Trump does not have the authorization or the legal power to just take the U.S. into war with another country, just attack them without congressional authorization, without an outright declaration of war, or unless we were first attacked by the other side. None of those things are in case now, so we can't do that. More on that later. But let's say that happens. Maybe he even gets an authorization from Congress and they decide to go ahead and do that. Now then, what happens if instead of just going after Iran by itself, now then they've got MiG-35 jets or S-400, maybe even S-500 air defense systems, a bunch of drones from the Russian side that are even in addition to what the Iranian side can make by itself, or air defense capacity, or anti-aircraft missiles, etc. And all of a sudden, Russia's just openly saying, yeah, here's all this stuff. You want to come into Iran? You're going to be running into this. Are we going to be okay with that? Are we going to be fine with that? Are we going to, again, just kind of shrug our shoulders and go, it's just how war works now? I doubt very seriously that that would be a passive situation, that we would be okay with that. And yet we're doing all these things with the Russian side. There was another thing that the second thing I said I wanted from that one is it says that this is one of the bigger problems, that it says this is going back all the way toward the beginning, where they're kind of looking for the underdog situation here, where the West, the U.S. specifically, and NATO thought that, yeah, we can win this thing. Gary, if you can put that second, there you go, thanks. The partnership's guiding idea was that this close cooperation might allow the Ukrainians to accomplish the unlikeliest defeats, to deliver the invading Russians a crushing blow. And in strike after successful strike in the first chapters of the war, enabled by Ukrainian bravery and dexterity, but also by Russian incompetence, that the underdog ambition increasingly seemed within reach. Folks, it was never within reach. They should have never. I was writing since before the war started, don't do this. All you got to do is take NATO off the table. There was a lot of other things that were involved, but if you took NATO off the table and said, all right, actually, we're not going to go down that path, everything would have been fine. You'd have stayed in some anxiety and some conflict or some, I guess, diplomatic difficulties, et cetera. But the war itself wouldn't have started, because that was the core non-negotiable for the Russian side. NATO going into Ukraine, which we continued to declare all the way up until the final that it was going to happen. But the reason why I was saying this, because all you got to do is just look at the balance of power between the two sides, and you could have seen you had whatever it was, 100 million more people on the Russian side, and many millions of military-aged males that could be brought into the fight. You had a domestic industrial capacity on the Russian side that could never have been matched on the Ukraine side. A huge air force, air defense capacity, large standing formations that had been trained or whatever. They underperformed, the Russian side did, in the first 6 months, especially of the war, in a big way tactically. But if you know anything about history, you know that Russians usually start off bad, pay a bloody price, fix the situation, and then move forward because they have the resources for it. They have the manpower, they have the natural resources, and they definitely have the will, just like any country would if it felt like its security on its actual border, like the United States would. If we're talking Mexico or Canada, we would take action. I mean, look how we're doing right now, just because of drug cartel issues and because of fentanyl. We're ready to take action here. That's a minuscule compared to actually having a foreign power put a military alliance on your border. That's the issue with which the Russians are fighting here. And now that they're seeing that we are thinking we can win that we think if we just put enough ammunition, enough weapons, enough training, enough intelligence, that all of those out of balance power dynamics between the two will suddenly be offloaded. And it was a fantasy. But that's where the mentality was on our side, that we thought, no, we couldn't do that. And as I'm going to show you, it turns out to be even worse here in a second on the third porch, is because they talk about the proof of concept. Gary, if you can throw that third one, thank you. An early proof of concept was a campaign against one of Russia's most feared battle groups, the 58th Combined Arms Army. In mid-2022, using American intelligence and targeting information, the Ukrainians unleashed a rocket barrage at the headquarters of the 58th in Kherson region, killing generals and staff officers inside. Again and again, the group set up another location. Each time the Americans found it, and the Ukrainian generals destroyed it. Now, one of the other things in that article, it goes on to say, is that when they were having this early success, the U.S. and the Western side, is that, and I think it was when General Surovikin was in charge, and he was thinking about withdrawing his troops from Kherson. So this must have been about August, September, October 2022, that time frame. The Surovikin was saying, okay, there had been pressure put on it. According to the details of this article here, most of it was the U.S. planned and the U.S. executed. And there was some issues on the Ukrainian side we'll get to in a second. But the bottom line is that the Russians were in danger here of being able to withdraw from Kherson and get back on the Russian side of the Dnieper River, or the Dnipro down in there. Here's the problem, is that this said, and I'm not making this up, go and look in the article. It said that the American side had calculated that there would be between a 5 and 10% chance of all of these activities that had happened up until that point, that Russia could resort to nuclear weapons. But if the Russians, if the Ukraine side successfully crossed the Dnipro and started Russia back in the direction of Crimea, Now then they're saying that the chance would go up to 50%. And so they said, well, we don't want that. And as it turned out, they didn't have to worry about it because Surovikin himself figured it out, withdrew his troops from there, blew all the bridges up so that there wouldn't be the risk of that. This matches what Jim Shido has said so ago. It matches what I've told you other times, that there was a chance that Russians were thinking about using nuclear weapons and they chose not to because we talked them off the ledge or something like that. But here's the bigger issue that didn't get much notice. You're telling me that prior to that event, you calculated there was a 5 to 10% chance of this war going nuclear, and you kept going? I mean, that almost by itself should be the headlines. That the Biden administration thought there was a 5 and 10% chance of a nuclear weapon and still gave the orders to continue helping the Ukraine side against Russia. That is criminal. Because if you go nuclear weapons, I mean, obviously millions could get killed. And if it gets out of control, it's thermonuclear war and everyone dies. I mean, the world as we know it would cease to exist. And you're playing with that kind of nuclear fire intentionally, knowingly, you calculate it? That is insane. I just can't believe that we would take that kind of a gamble over something that had no upside. The very best that you could theoretically conceive of was pushing Russia back to where they started back in 2022. And even that it wasn't a rational move. It was a fantasy theoretical situation. But that wouldn't have changed any of the dynamics. It wouldn't have changed European security. It wouldn't have changed American security. But it would have come, even your theory, even your fantasy, at the risk of nuclear escalation. And I'm like, what in God's name is wrong with these people? That you would risk a nuclear war with zero upside and potentially humanitarian catastrophe on the downside. And you continued on. Now, Russia went past that. In the intervening couple of years, they increased their conventional capacity. And so now that I think the chances of, at the moment, of using nuclear weapons is far lower than it was then, but it stays on the table. And that is the reason why what the U.S. and the Europeans in their own self-interest should do is get this off the table, get the war over with, and get that back down to like a nominal, just a theoretical possibility, not even some actual percentage. I mean, just get it off the table. There's no value in it. And yet we keep going down that path. That's why one of the many reasons why I'm so adamant that we just need to get this war off the table by whatever means we can get as quickly as possible. Because continuing on could take what has been a bad situation and making it catastrophically, profoundly worse. We'll see what happens from here. One quick thing that before I let you go today, this an interesting thing from the U.S. side, unrelated to this, but on the Department of Defense, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth released this video that showed a new focus on the U.S. side. Here's what he had to say.
Hey everybody, Pete Hegseth here. We're about to land in Washington, D.C. on our way back from Japan, where we've been meeting with the troops, talking to allies and partners, reestablishing deterrence in the Indo-Pacific. It's Sunday, but of course we're still working. I want to show you one thing. It's a new memorandum that's coming out today on combat arms standards. You see, for far too long, we allowed standards to slip, and different standards for men and women in combat arms MOSs and jobs. That's not acceptable. We need to have the same standard, male or female, in our combat roles to ensure our men and women who are under our leaders or in those formations have the best possible leaders and the highest possible standards that are not based at all on your sex, if you're a man or a woman. So I'm signing this memorandum today. The services will review, and soon we will have nothing but the highest and equal standards for men and women in combat.
Okay, from a now strictly U.S. perspective, I'm for that, to having one standard, one high standard that everybody needs to meet. Because when you're talking about national security, when you're talking about the capacity, the only thing you should be doing policy-wise is something that's going to make your military more effective in combat. If adding women makes it more effective, add women. If there are jobs that can be done that make the ability of the armed forces better, by all means do that. There should be one standard. Will this improve the U.S. military? If it doesn't, if adding women into it actually demeans it or reduces it because they're just physically incapable in some areas, like, something on the front lines in the infantry or the artillery or engineering units, for example. There may be just some physical issues that women are just not as capable of as men. Then that's not something that needs to be going on. So I like that there's just one standard that needs to happen. But listen, there are far bigger issues than just the standard. It's a good start as long as it's a start. But we need to look at the warfighting capacity. That I'm actually reading a book, which I'll be talking with about here shortly, about how, especially prior to this, in the years prior to this, not just the Biden administration, but going back a long way, the Department of Defense has been going on making decisions about future warfare, et cetera, that are completely or largely anyway divorced from reality of what's going on in the Russia-Ukraine war, demonstrated on the ground. We're going in directions that really create vulnerabilities for ourselves in future conflicts should we go to war right now. So there's a big job ahead for Secretary Hegseth. And I like the fact that, though, he's not just giving this order, do it today, but he's saying, all right, first of all, let's figure this out. Let's go down the path of doing an analysis. What are the standards? What are the issues? What should the standards be? How does that affect things, et cetera? Then put it into account. That's the right answer. That's what we should do. We need to take that same methodology and mentality and apply it to our actual warfighting doctrine. Here's how we're organized for combat. Here's our ammunition. Here's our defense industrial base capacities, et cetera. How does this match up with how we think that war would fight if we had to fight an unexpected war against a peer competitor in either China or Russia? Can we do it? What, in light of the combat situations on the ground in Russia and Ukraine, and some other fights that have happened in Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia in 2000, et cetera, what do we need to do different? Let's do that same level of analysis quickly, and then start making some rational choices here so that we don't get caught, aside from whatever the standards are, into a war that we can never win. That's what we need to avoid. That's all we have for you today. I appreciate your time. By the way, you may have noticed I'm in a little bit different surroundings. I'm on international travel at the moment. Probably later this week, I might be back in the old studios back in Washington, D.C., and we'll continue going on there. And in the meantime, thanks very much for this. We appreciate you, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.